Racism often hides in plain sight, but in a small southern town, that quiet truth didn't just linger. That morning, Celine Carter found a noose hanging in her barn, a brutal message telling her to leave the land her family had built for generations. They didn't know Celine Carter wasn't just a black single mother. She was a retired Special Forces sniper, calm, lethal, 2,000 confirmed kills. Some wars never really end. They thought she'd be scared. They thought she'd be easy. They thought she'd be alone. They were wrong, because Celine Carter doesn't run. She stands, she fights. And this time, she was ready to end the war before it ever truly began. Before we go any further, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. Chapter 1. The Threat. The men who came to take her land had no idea what they were walking into. They thought Celine Carter was just another black woman alone on a piece of dirt too stubborn to let go. They thought they could scare her, push her off the soil her family had worked for generations. But they hadn't counted on what happens when you mistake a soldier for a victim. Celine Carter didn't run. She defended, and this time, she was ready to end the fight for good. The wind moved slow through the dry Georgia fields, brushing the golden stalks of hay in soft waves, steady like the rhythm of a lullaby. Celine stood at the edge of her porch, a chipped black coffee mug in one hand, her sharp eyes watching the morning mist rise over the tree line that bordered her land. The house was quiet, peaceful, just how she liked it. Out here, the world didn't rush, it breathed. From the pasture, the livestock stirred as dawn stretched its fingers across the sky. Chickens scratched near the coop, goats bleated softly, waiting on Celine's morning routine. The farmhouse stood old but strong, weathered with stories. Black ownership, passed down like a sacred vow since her grandfather had carved this place from wilderness with bare hands and a rifle slung across his back. Celine had been raised with calloused palms and a steady aim. This land didn't care much for words. It respected work. And it respected those who could hold their ground. Inside the house, Malik's voice floated down from upstairs, arguing with some history podcast playing over Bluetooth speakers. 16 now, lanky but growing into the weight of his own strength, sharp-eyed like his mother. Celine had taught him early, read a man's hands before you trust his mouth, and never, ever run. Not unless you had cover. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. By 7, they were on the road, Celine's beat-up Ford truck humming down the gravel. Malik rode beside her, sketching drone designs in his notebook, dreaming big the way boys should. One day, maybe he'd join the Air Force, like his father once planned to. Celine didn't speak much when she drove. Silence stretched between them like an old map, marked only by the occasional nod or a soft, "You good?" The feed store was quieter than usual that morning. One of the younger clerks barely looked up as Celine walked inside. Another, older and red-faced with a name tag that read Trent, stiffened at the sight of her, clearing his throat when she approached the counter. "Y'all get that hay shipment from Madison yet?" Celine asked, calm. Trent scratched at his chin, eyes darting anywhere but at her. "Still stuck somewhere. Truck broke down. Might be a while." Celine didn't answer. She just stared at him long enough for the man to shift on his feet, uncomfortable. Behind him, a handwritten sign hung crooked on the wall. "Locals first. Always." Back in the truck, Malik stared out the window, jaw tight. "You see how he wouldn't even look at you?" he muttered. Celine didn't turn the key just yet. She let the weight of the words sit there between them like an old wound. "I saw," she said finally, "and I saw that sign too." They stopped at the gas station next, filling up on diesel. Celine stepped out of the truck, boots crunching against the gravel. A white man leaned against the ice machine, cigarette dangling from his lips. He didn't glance. He stared. long and hard. His eyes traveled from Celine to the Black Lives Matter sticker on her back window, then to Malik, who was stretching his arms by the pump. Celine stared back, didn't blink. The man didn't say a word. He didn't have to. She got back in the truck and drove away without another look. It was only when they turned off the main road onto the dirt path leading home that Celine felt it, the strange stillness that settled over the land. The sun had lifted high enough now to cast long shadows across the fields. The breeze had gone still, too still. Celine slowed the truck as they pulled into the driveway. That was when she saw it. The barn door hung wide open, only it hadn't been left that way. She knew her locks, knew exactly how much pressure she used on the latch every single night. Celine parked the truck and turned to Malik, her voice steady. "Stay here." He didn't argue. She stepped out, moving quiet, boots soft on the earth, a blade tucked at the small of her back, another in her boot. Old habits. Inside the barn, the morning light slipped through the slats in streaks, painting the dust in golden lines. But it wasn't the light that caught her eye. It was the noose, hanging dead center from the rafters, the rope thick, rough, frayed at the edges, like it had been used before. Celine didn't flinch. She didn't even move. Her eyes slid to the wall behind the noose where someone had carved into the wooden beams with a knife. The letters were jagged, angry, cut deep into the pine. "Time to go, girl." Celine stood there a moment longer, not touching the rope, not touching the message. Then she stepped back into the sunlight, her face unreadable, and locked the barn door behind her. At breakfast, she said nothing. She slid a plate of eggs and grits in front of Malik, poured his orange juice, and sat across from him, her own food untouched. But the words carved into that beam burned like a hot brand behind her eyes. Malik chewed slowly, watching her. "You gonna tell me what that was?" "No," Celine answered, eyes on her fork. "Not yet." He set the fork down, leaned in closer. "But I saw it. I know what I saw. What if they come back?" "They won't," she said. "Not today." "You sure?" "I'm prepared." And she was, because Celine Carter knew exactly what was coming. And she wasn't planning on running. She was planning on making damn sure they never tried again. Chapter 2. The Warning Rope. By noon, Celine Carter had traded her worn work boots for combat-grade ones. She pulled on her utility vest, every pocket packed with purpose. Down beneath the farmhouse, tucked away behind a cellar door hidden beneath the kitchen rug, waited the part of her life she had put away. The soldier's life. Most folks around Ridge Hollow didn't know about her past. They saw a single black mother, a widow raising her boy on hard work and quiet pride. They didn't see the woman who once ran reconnaissance missions through jungles and deserts, the woman who could disassemble and reassemble an M4 with her eyes closed. Her rifle was still there, sealed in its hard case. An M4, scoped and customized, foldable stock, suppressor, well-maintained, oiled, cleaned, a soldier's ritual, not for show, but for readiness. But Celine knew better than anyone. Wars weren't won by bullets, not first. She picked up her phone and started making calls. Old friends, retired folks. Some answered, some didn't. The ones who did spoke low, the edge of fatigue sharp in their voices. Voices of people who had seen trouble rising before the smoke even hit the sky. One of them, a former Army buddy down in Sandersville, kept his words brief. 3 fires in the last month, he said. All black-owned farms, ruled as accidents. Sheriff's office did the paperwork. No follow-up. Celine didn't curse, didn't waste the energy. She hung up, slid the phone into her pocket, and headed straight for the courthouse. The records office smelled like old paper and desperation. Rows of cracked filing cabinets lined the back walls, and a clerk behind the scratched glass window barely looked up as she entered. She didn't need his help. Celine knew what to look for. She sifted through property sales from the last 18 months. It didn't take long to see the pattern. 6 black-owned farms, sold under pressure. Each transaction stamped and signed just days after something terrible happened. A fire, a missing person, structural damage, too expensive to repair. And every single one of those deeds had gone to companies most folks had never heard of. Shell companies, names like Midline Holdings, Golden Acre Investments. But Celine found the thread that tied them all together. Forward Futures, listed as the parent corporation on nearly every sale. Seafers County, the same name that had quietly started showing up on flyers posted around Ridge Hollow, promising rural redevelopment and land revitalization. Celine scanned the copies with a cheap pen scanner, slid the files into her coat pocket, and nodded once toward the clerk on her way out. He didn't smile, didn't even meet her eyes. Just looked back down at his desk and kept his mouth shut. She wasn't surprised. She drove east next, toward the outer edge of Ridge Hollow. The sign leading into the black farming community had been shot up years ago, paint chipped, bullet holes pocked across the letters. You could barely make out the name anymore. She parked outside the Wilkins place, or what was left of it. The porch steps had collapsed in on themselves, windows boarded up, the paint stripped away by rain and wind. A yellow eviction notice flapped against the front door, crusted to the wood like a scab. Celine tore the paper down. No tire tracks, no footprints, no dogs barking. It wasn't just abandoned, it had been erased. By the time Celine got back home, the sky had turned soft with the weight of evening. Malik was sitting on the porch, backpack slung over one shoulder, phone in hand. "Where'd you go?" he asked. "Everywhere," Celine answered. "You found something." She nodded once. "Too many things." Malik stood up slowly. His voice stayed low. "You're not going to tell me again, are you?" Celine paused. Her gaze softened, but only for a moment. "I need you safe," she said. "That's all." He didn't argue. He just nodded. He knew the fight wasn't coming. It was already here. That night, long after the last light had faded from the horizon, Celine sat alone at the kitchen table. A map spread wide in front of her, red markers circling the names of every farm that had burned, every family that had sold their land under the barrel of a threat. She traced the lines connecting each address. The pattern was there, clear, deliberate, spreading like infection. The local sheriff's website was still up. Celine clicked through, half expecting the page to be blank. But no, there he was. Sheriff Doyle Grant, smiling in his badge photo, gray-haired and too proud. He hadn't returned her call from earlier. She hadn't expected him to. Celine dug deeper. Local news archives, reports buried behind stories about gas prices and county fairs. But between the lines, if you knew how to read the silence, the story was written clear. Dispute ends in fire. Missing family presumed relocated. Property damage halts harvest. The words bent just enough to hide the truth. It wasn't random. It was a strategy. By dawn, Celine was back outside, walking the perimeter of her land. Her boots crunched through the frosted grass. One of the wires near the west fence had been cut. Clean, fast, surgical. Her eyes narrowed. She scanned the tree line, mind already calculating. If they came again, they'd try from the blind spot near the creek, the low slope, the place with the best cover. That's where she'd start fortifying. They wanted her gone, but they were about to learn Celine Carter wasn't going anywhere. Chapter 3. Patterns of Violence. The church stood at the far end of a narrow, unpaved road, tucked behind a wall of pine trees older than most of the town itself. Its white paint had faded beneath the Georgia sun, cracked and weather-beaten from years of rain and silence. Celine Carter hadn't stepped inside since Malik's baptism nearly a decade ago, and even then she hadn't stayed long. This wasn't a visit for faith or forgiveness. This was reconnaissance. She pushed the door open slow, boots creaking against the wood floor as the heavy air of the sanctuary settled around her like a shroud. Stained glass spilled light across the empty pews, soft colors falling over the silence. The room felt too still, the kind of stillness that held breath behind its teeth. At the far end, beneath a fading mural of a shepherd holding his flock, stood Jordan Tate. He was still tall, still lean, though streaks of gray had begun to edge into his beard. His hands moved slow, methodical, polishing the brass organ pipes the same way Celine remembered him cleaning his weapon in the desert heat all those years ago. Jordan didn't turn when he heard the door open. He didn't have to. He knew who it was. "I heard about the Wilkins place." Celine's voice barely broke the hush. "But I didn't hear all of it." Jordan kept working, his hands steady. It burned all right, but they weren't inside when it did. Celine's boots carried her forward, each step measured. "They left?" "2 nights before. Packed up what they could, took the Dodge, and disappeared. Somebody came around waving cash and papers, offering to buy the land outright. They didn't even clean out the house." Celine's jaw clenched. "Forward Futures? Different name on the paperwork, but the bank trails match." Jordan wiped his hands on a cloth, finally turning to face her. His eyes were sharp beneath the calm. "Fancy website. No people listed. Quiet company." Celine nodded slowly. The pieces were falling into place now, and they weren't smooth edges. They were razors. "People think you're back in the fight," Jordan said. "I didn't leave," Celine answered. "I just stopped chasing shadows." Jordan crossed his arms, leaning against the pulpit. "And now?" Celine's eyes never wavered. "Now they've stepped out into the light." For a moment, the silence felt heavier than the church walls. Then Jordan spoke, his voice low. "What do you really want from me, Celine?" "I need to know if you remember who you were. Before the sermons. Before the suit." Jordan gave a soft breath of a laugh. "You mean before I started preaching peace and forgiveness?" "I mean before you laid down your rifle." His eyes held hers. No denial, no protest, just memory. And after a long pause, he nodded. "I remember." The smell of smoke reached her before the calls did. The wind had shifted just past sundown, thick with the scent of burning wood, and something worse beneath it. Celine was in the cellar, checking supplies, reloading ammunition, when the first scream split the quiet.
She didn't hesitate. She grabbed her rifle, gave Malik the 2-finger signal they'd practiced since he was old enough to understand what it meant, and within seconds they were in the truck, rolling fast down the gravel road. The Turner farm sat at the edge of the county line, tucked beside a shallow creek bed and wrapped in the fencing Reggie Turner had built by hand over 10 long years. But by the time Celine reached the property, the flames were already a second sun against the night. The barn was gone, swallowed whole. Fire crawled up the chicken coops, gnawing at the edges of the farmhouse with a hunger that felt personal. Smoke curled into the sky in thick black ribbons. The roar of the fire was loud, but it wasn't the loudest thing. The loudest thing was the sobbing. Evelyn Turner, knees in the dirt, her hands black with ash, rocking back and forth beside a body lying still near the fence. Reggie, his shirt burned through in patches, his boots blackened, one hand stretched out toward nothing, fingers frozen as if he'd been reaching for help that never came. Celine moved slow, scanning the tree line, the road, the yard. No tire tracks, no footprints, no shell casings, surgical, clean, designed to leave nothing but pain. And the neighbors? They stood just far enough away to watch, arms crossed, mouths shut, eyes heavy with the weight of everything they wouldn't say. Not one of them had called the fire department. Not one of them moved to help. Later, when the flames had burned themselves out and the sheriff's deputies arrived to scribble their notes and leave again without questions, Celine sat alone at her kitchen table, the map spread wide in front of her, red lines connecting farms, red circles marking each incident. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. It wasn't hate working alone. It was a plan. When the morning broke, Celine found Jordan waiting on her porch, sleeves rolled up. His jaw set hard, the quiet fury of a man who'd spent too long hoping things might change on their own. "I've got 5 who will stand with us," he said. 4 ex-service. 1 still active reserves. They're watching the roads now. Celine stepped aside and let him in. Malik sat on the floor of the living room, dismantling and cleaning the components of an old sidearm, methodical, calm. Jordan paused when he saw him, eyebrows raised slightly. "He's good," Celine said. Malik didn't even look up. "She's not teaching me how to shoot," he said, voice steady. "She's teaching me how to defend." Jordan nodded once, his voice soft. "That's the only kind of fight worth learning." By the time the sun set again, they had started planning for war. Chapter 4. Calling Old Friends. There was no panic in Celine Carter's movements, only precision. War wasn't new to her. It didn't rattle her bones the way it did men who hadn't been tested. She'd seen fear on the battlefield, real fear, the kind that strips men down to nothing but instinct. This wasn't that. This was clarity. By the time the Turner fire had burned itself down to embers, Celine knew exactly what she was up against. And it wasn't just a handful of bitter locals playing at hate. It was something organized, funded, focused. She started with the names she could still trust. One by one, Celine called the old numbers, men and women who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with her overseas. Some picked up, some didn't. The ones who answered spoke with the same careful weight she carried in her own voice, the weight of experience. "Been a long time, Crossfire," one voice greeted her, the old nickname from her sniper days, whispered like a ghost between them. "Too long," Celine answered, "but I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't serious." "I figured." A pause on the line. "Tell me what you need." She didn't sugarcoat it. Land grabs, black farms, fires, disappearances, local laws asleep at the wheel. Or worse. The voice on the other end gave a low whistle. "You thinking vigilante?" "I'm thinking survival." Another pause. Then, "I'm in." It went like that, call after call, each one tightening the net a little more. Some of them had sworn off fights like this, hung up their boots and buried their scars beneath small-town routines. But when Celine laid out the facts, when she told them about the noose in her barn, the message carved into the beams, the men who thought they could erase black families 1 acre at a time, they all said the same thing. "Where do you need me?" The plan wasn't complicated. It was Survival 101. Jordan Tate handled the rotation, watch shifts, signal points, backup routes. They used his church tower as their comms post, retrofitting the bell loft with salvaged signal boosters and battery rigs. They didn't have the luxury of drones or military-grade tech. But Celine knew how to make do. She had rigged motion sensors from old trail cams, strung tripwires low in the brush, silent alarms buried beneath fence posts. At night, while Ridge Hollow slept, Celine and Jordan's crew walked the lines. Quiet feet, eyes sharp, every rustle, every breath of wind counted, and they weren't alone. Word spread faster than fire. Ruth Daniels showed up first, a small woman with silver curls and the steady hands of a medic. She carried a first aid pack on one shoulder and the look of someone who'd already decided she wasn't leaving. "I'm not here to watch," Ruth said plainly. "You're gonna need someone who knows how to patch the holes when this thing breaks open." She didn't wait for Celine to argue, just rolled out her supplies onto the old barn table and started checking inventory. Behind her came Clarence Fields, the oldest man still living on the far edge of the valley. A farmer by trade, stubborn by design, he brought nothing but his old sidearm and the quiet resolve of a man who had buried too many neighbors. "They won't take my land while I'm still breathing," Clarence said. "Figure I've got enough left in me to hold a line." The team grew slow but steady. 5, then 8, then 12. No uniforms, no ranks, but every one of them carried the same thing behind their eyes, the weight of people who'd already lost too much. Malik watched all of it quietly, absorbing every piece. His mother didn't keep him away from the work. She'd never believed in hiding the hard truths. Instead, she taught him with steady hands and patient words. "This isn't about pulling a trigger," Selena told him one morning as they checked the fence line. "It's about knowing when not to." Malik nodded, adjusting the sling on the rifle they'd trained with. His grip was better now, his breathing steadier. The boy who once built drones from scrap was learning to move like Shadow. They practiced at dawn, while the air was still cool and the fog hung low over the fields. Tin cans at first, then fruit swinging from string, moving targets, dummies strung between trees. Malik missed more than he hit in the beginning, but not once did he complain. Celine watched him sharpen, not hardening into hate, but into readiness. The first warning shot wasn't a bullet, it was a brick, wrapped in barbed wire, tied with a strip of blood-stained cloth, soaked in kerosene. It came through the kitchen window just after sunset, crashing against the floor with a thud that echoed through the house. Malik froze where he stood. Selene didn't. She walked straight to the brick, picked it up barehanded, carried it to the sink, struck a match, and held it over the flames until the cloth turned to ash. "They think we're scared," she said quietly, her voice steady as steel. "They don't know what fear really looks like." By the time the sun rose again over the Carter land, every fence post had been double-checked, every sensor recalibrated, every fallback plan rehearsed twice. Celine stood alone on the porch, eyes fixed on the tree line. She wasn't waiting for mercy. She was waiting for the next move, because the men who came for her land thought they were hunting prey. They had no idea they'd just walked into a fortress. Chapter 5. The Noose and the Map. The noose still hung from the rafters. Celine Carter had left it there on purpose, not out of fear, not out of some need to remind herself what hate looked like up close, but because she wanted to remember exactly who she was dealing with, the kind of men who carved threats into wood, who thought terror alone could drive her off the land her family had bled to keep. The words carved into the beam stayed burned into her mind. "Time to go, girl." But Celine wasn't going anywhere. She had made her decision. Now it was time to understand the enemy. By mid-morning, the barn had become more than a shelter for livestock. The old feed table had turned into a war desk, maps spread out, hand-drawn sketches of the land surrounding Ridge Hollow, notes scrawled in Celine's sharp, clean handwriting. Red lines connected the dots. Arrows marked likely entry points, blind spots along the creek bed, weaknesses in the outer fencing. Jordan Tate stood across from her, arms crossed, eyes following her trail of markings as she moved through the strategy. "They've been testing," Celine said. "First the noose, then the brick. They're feeling out the perimeter, watching how fast we respond." Jordan gave a slow nod. "Standard recon." "They're not locals doing this on their own." Celine tapped the map hard enough to leave a dent. "They're trained. This is too clean." She flipped through the photocopies she had pulled from the courthouse records. Every land sale, every burned farm circled and marked. All roads led back to one name: Forward Futures. Jordan's jaw tightened as he read over the documents. "How long they been moving on these properties?" 18 months, Selena answered. 6 black-owned farms, all sold under pressure, all after a fire, a missing person, or damage that forced the sale.
She pushed the last page toward him, a flowchart of the holding companies, names that sounded harmless. Golden Acre Investments, Sunland Redevelopment Group, but each one tied back in quiet loops to Forward Futures. "Shell games," Jordan muttered. "Keep the real owner hidden under 3 layers of paperwork." Not hidden well enough. Celine dropped the final document on the table, the deed transfer for the Wilkins place. Signed off 2 days after the fire. Processed so fast it could only mean one thing: planned. Jordan ran a hand over his beard, shaking his head. "The sheriff? Sheriff Doyle Grant?" Celine's voice didn't soften. "He's either blind, paid off, or in on it." Jordan didn't argue. He'd lived in Ridge Hollow long enough to know the weight of silence from men like Grant. The sun sank low by the time Celine finished walking the perimeter again. Malik followed close behind her, watching her every move, matching her pace without a word. His eyes were sharper now. His questions had grown fewer, but smarter. "They're going to come at night, aren't they?" he asked as they walked the eastern fence line. Celine paused at the fence post, adjusting the sensor wiring. "Most likely." "Why?" "Because they think night gives them cover, makes them ghosts." She rose, brushing dust from her gloves, meeting Malik's gaze square. "But they don't know," she said. "I see better in the dark." After dinner, what little Malik managed to eat, Celine laid out the next part of the plan. She called Ruth Daniels and Clarence Fields to the house. Jordan arrived last, bringing with him the first few volunteers who had been keeping quiet watch on the back roads. Celine stood at the head of the table, the map pinned beneath 2 rifles and a rusted wrench. Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "We're not here to scare them off," she began. "We're here to make sure they never step foot on this land again." She tapped the map where the creek curved low behind the barn. "They'll come through here first. It's the softest entry. Too much cover from the trees." She moved her finger north to the open fields. "But if they're smart, they'll send a second wave wide, flank the silo, try to cut off any response." Jordan pointed at the bend near the church road. "And if they circle that way?" "Then they're walking right into our fallback line." Clarence leaned in, squinting at the rough sketch. "You planning on posting up shooters?" Celine nodded once. "Only where we know they'll come. We don't need to hunt them. We need to make sure they don't make it back out." Ruth leaned her elbows on the table, her medic bag at her side. "We're outgunned. You know that." Celine's eyes didn't waver. "We're outgunned, but we're not outsmarted." She reached into the toolbox at her feet, pulled out a battered old satellite photo, printed in black and white. She'd taken it off a Forward Futures rally flyer that had been quietly slipped onto bulletin boards 2 towns over. Beneath the photo, in small bold letters, was the name she'd been waiting to confirm. Travis Cole. Jordan's breath caught sharp. "That bastard." "Former paramilitary," Celine said, eyes narrowed. "Now calling himself a land consultant." Ruth frowned. "The same Travis Cole that ran those contractor crews out west?" "Same one." Jordan's shoulders tensed. "That means this isn't just a local hit. This is coordinated." Celine folded the map slowly, her voice lowering. "And I plan to make damn sure they never coordinate again." By the time the meeting broke, the last streak of light had bled out of the horizon. Ruth packed her gear quietly. Jordan lingered at the doorway. "They know you're ready," he said. "They're still going to come." Celine looked past him, out toward the tree line. "I'm counting on it." Chapter 6. The Burned Farm. The smell of smoke always arrived before the news. Celine Carter was in the cellar checking ammunition when the wind shifted. Thick, bitter, carrying the bite of burning wood and something darker beneath it. She didn't wait for the phone to ring, didn't wait for confirmation. She grabbed her rifle, gave Malik the sharp 2-finger signal they'd practiced since he could walk, and within seconds they were in the truck, barreling down the gravel road toward the Turner place. The sky over the far ridge was glowing orange, bright as sunrise, but cruel. Reggie Turner's farm sat on the county line, tucked quiet between the creek and the hills. 10 years of sweat built that place. 10 years of work laid into those fences, those barns, those fields. But fire didn't care about work. The barn was already gone, swallowed whole. The chicken coops collapsed into smoking heaps, and the flames licked high at the Turner farmhouse itself, rage climbing the walls like it had a purpose. Malik's breath caught sharp as they rounded the bend. His eyes went wide. Celine kept her foot hard on the gas. They reached the edge of the property fast, headlights bouncing across the dirt. But there were no deputies here, no fire trucks. Only a handful of neighbors standing just outside the glow of the blaze, arms crossed, faces hard, eyes saying nothing. And at the center of it, Evelyn Turner, knees in the dirt, hands black with soot and ash, rocking back and forth beside the still body of her husband. Reggie, face down in the mud near the fence line, shirt burned through in patches, one boot missing, his outstretched hand reaching for something that hadn't come in time. Malik froze when he saw the body. Selene put a hand on his shoulder. "Stay behind me," she said, voice low, but her eyes were already scanning. Not the fire. Not yet. She watched the ground, the trees, the road. No fresh tire tracks, no footprints where there should have been. No shell casings. Whoever did this had been careful, too careful. Surgical. Planned. This wasn't a message. This was an execution. The fire burned itself down to embers before any help arrived. By the time the first deputy's cruiser rolled up the road, there was nothing left to save. The report was thin. Accidental fire. Possible electrical. No mention of the noose that had shown up on Celine's own land just days before. No mention of the other farms already gone. Just paperwork, cold and clean. The neighbors stayed where they were, silent, still, watching but not speaking. Celine stood at the edge of the Turner property until the last of the smoke drifted into the sky. Watching it rise, watching it disappear. Malik stood beside her, fists clenched, shaking. "This was no accident," he said, teeth tight. "I know. They're going to get away with it." Celine's voice stayed level. "Not if we stop them." Back at the farmhouse, Celine spread the map across the table again. The red circles were filling in now, farm after farm, name after name, burned or sold. Every one of them black-owned, every one of them marked like it was a target. "This isn't hate acting on its own," she said when Jordan came through the door. "This is strategy." Jordan stared down at the map, tracing the lines with the tip of his finger, his jaw clenched tight. "It's a campaign. A land war," Celine said. Ruth arrived an hour later, quiet, steady. Her hands smelled like antiseptic and smoke. She'd been down at the Turner place until they carted Reggie's body away. "They're not going to call this murder," Ruth said as she dropped her gear beside the table. "They'll call it tragedy, say it was bad wiring or a stray spark." Celine didn't look up. "But they'll be wrong. They know they're wrong," Ruth replied. "They just don't care." At dawn, Celine took Malik back out to the perimeter, past the silo, down toward the creek bend where the cover was thickest. She moved slow, quiet, eyes always forward. "Come here," she told Malik, motioning him close. "You see this slope?" Malik nodded. "This is where they'll come if they're smart." She crouched, tracing the line of sight with her hand. Blind spot from the road. Easy cover from the trees. Malik followed her line, understanding sinking deeper into his bones. "We're gonna make this the worst place they could ever step into," Celine said. "I want sensors here, alarms buried low. We're not waiting to be surprised." Malik nodded. No questions, no hesitation. He was learning. The next meeting at the barn wasn't a discussion. It was a briefing. Celine stood at the head of the table, pointing out positions, shifts, fallback lines. Assignments were given without debate. Jordan handled the flank teams. Ruth ran the medic post. Clarence and two others took the North Watch. No one argued. No one questioned why they were there, because by now they all knew exactly what was at stake.
The first shot had already been fired. It had come in the form of fire, but the next shot would not go unanswered.
Chapter 7. Armoring the Land. The next morning brought no peace. The smoke had barely lifted from the Turner farm, but Celine Carter was already on her feet, boots laced, vest strapped, eyes sharp. There was no time to grieve. Not yet. Grief was a privilege for after the fight. Right now, there was only work. Celine walked the perimeter of her land at first light, Malik by her side. They moved quiet, heads low, scanning the ground where the frost clung to the grass. The air was cold against their skin, but their blood stayed hot. At the creek bend, where the slope dipped low beneath the tree cover, Selene stopped. She crouched, fingers brushing over the soil, feeling where the earth had been disturbed. "Here," she said softly. "This is where they'll come." Malik knelt beside her, watching, learning. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Selene pointed toward the stand of oaks near the south fence. "That's your post. If they break through here, you cut their line of sight." Malik nodded, serious. Selene's hand found his shoulder, steady. "But you don't engage first. You wait. You confirm. You never waste a bullet on a guess." "I know," Malik answered, but she could hear the burn in his voice, the same fire she'd felt at his age. "Knowing isn't enough," Selene said. "Knowing keeps you alive. Doing keeps you ready." By noon, the crew had gathered at the barn. The old space smelled like sweat and steel now, the walls lined with gear. Not fancy, not high-grade military, but enough. Enough to hold. Jordan Tate unrolled a fresh set of radio schematics onto the table. He tapped the frequencies with a thick finger. "We stay off the common channels, stick to short bursts, no long chatter." Clarence Field stood near the back wall, checking the weight on his sidearm. "What about fallback?" "We hold the line at the grain tower," Selene said. "If they breach the field, we regroup there." Ruth Daniels was kneeling near the corner, sorting supplies. Gauze, splints, sutures. Her hands moved fast, precise. "I want medics posted at the church and the silo," Selene continued. "No one gets left behind." There were no questions, no arguments, only the low nods of people who understood what was coming. That afternoon, Selene led Malik and Jordan through the eastern fields, laying wire low beneath the brush, setting sensors along the blind paths where the attackers might try to slip through. The devices were old, scavenged from hunting shops and army surplus bins, but Selene knew how to make them hum like new. Malik handled the wire spools, careful with the placement, watching his mother's hands as she clipped and sealed each connection. She taught him the work the same way she'd taught him to shoot. Patient, deliberate, no wasted motion. "You know why we use these sensors?" she asked him as they worked. "Because they tell us before the fight starts." Selene smiled faintly. "That's half of it." "What's the other half?" "They let the enemy think we're not watching." The sun was low by the time they finished laying the last line near the silo. Selene stood back, hands on her hips, eyes scanning the horizon as the light bled red into the dirt. Malik stood beside her, quiet. "They're going to come tonight," he said. Selene gave a small nod. "If not tonight, then soon." Malik turned to her, jaw tight. "I'm ready." She didn't answer right away, just watched the wind move through the tall grass, slow and easy. "Ready isn't enough," she said at last. "Prepared is what keeps you breathing." When night fell, Ridge Hollow went still, but the barn stayed awake. Inside, Jordan double-checked the radio frequencies. Clarence stacked sandbags at the fallback post. Ruth sorted through the last of the supplies. Malik sat cross-legged on the floor, Field stripping his rifle for the third time, hands steady, eyes sharp. Selene moved through the space like a current, checking each station, each weapon, each plan. There was no fear in her steps, no panic in her voice, only focus. She stopped at the table where Malik worked, crouching beside him. "Show me," she said. Malik moved through the steps, smooth, flawless. Selene nodded once. "Good." Then she stood, turned back to the map, and pointed to the creek bend. "Tonight, that's where they'll test us." Jordan leaned against the post nearby. "You really think they'll try again this soon?" Selene's eyes narrowed. "They don't think we're ready." Jordan gave a grim smile. "Their mistake." At midnight, the fields were quiet. The air held that heavy stillness, the kind that makes the skin itch before a fight. Celine stood at the loft window of the barn, binoculars raised, watching the tree line. No movement, no sound, but she could feel it. The way the land seemed to hold its breath. The way the goats wouldn't settle. The barn cat, usually prowling at night, perched high on the rafters, still and wide-eyed. Malik stood at the window beside her, his own scope trained on the south fence. "Do you think they're watching us right now?" he asked. Celine didn't lower the binoculars. "I hope so." Malik blinked, surprised. "Why?" "Because it means they're nervous." She let the silence hang there between them. "Fear," she said softly, "can be a weapon too." The sensors didn't trip that night. No alarms, no footsteps, but Celine didn't sleep. She stayed at the window, eyes steady, watching the dark. Because she knew patience could win a war, and when the next wave came, and it would come, they weren't going to find an easy target. They were going to find a soldier. Chapter 8. The First Engagement. It started the way most storms do. Quiet, no thunder, no flash of warning, just the air, heavy and still, sitting too thick on the skin. Celine Carter felt it first. A shift in the breeze. The way the goats huddled near the fence, restless. The barn cat gone silent, tucked so deep into the rafters you'd forget it was there. At 2:43 a.m., the first sensor chirped. Not loud, not urgent, but enough. Celine's eyes snapped open. She moved fast, sliding from the cot without a word, boots hitting the floor soft as breath. Malik stirred across the room but didn't need waking. He was up, rifle in hand, before she crossed the barn door. Jordan's voice crackled low over the comms. "Movement. East fence. 3 bodies, maybe 4. Testing the line." Celine pressed the radio to her lips. "Confirm." "Confirmed." She glanced at Malik. "Take your post, like we drilled." He nodded, no hesitation. The fear that had clung to him after the Turner fire was gone now, replaced by something sharper, something ready. Celine stepped out into the night. The fog lay thin over the field, drifting low like breath from the earth itself. But the stars were clear above, and the moon threw just enough light to make the shadows dangerous. She moved along the path toward the east blind, the ground soft beneath her boots. Rifle slung across her back, pistol at her hip. Every step measured, every muscle coiled. The sensor grid pulsed once more. Then Jordan's voice again. They're probing. Not rushing, just feeling out the perimeter. Celine crouched near the fence line, eyes narrowed toward the tree line. She saw it. A flicker of movement. One figure low to the ground, crawling slow through the tall grass. Another just behind him, slipping between the trees. Trained. Not locals. Not boys playing at hate. This was practiced. Celine clicked the comms. "Hold your fire. Let them show their hand." From his post near the silo, Malik watched through his scope, tracking the movement. His breath steady the way his mother had taught him. In through the nose. Hold. Exhale slow. He saw them too. 4 figures now, one staying back. The spotter, counting positions. 2 crawling low near the south fence. The 4th creeping along the creek bed, testing the blind spots. Malik's finger rested near the trigger but didn't tighten. Not yet. Celine's voice came soft over the radio. "Let them come." The attackers worked slow, careful, rotating between cover points, using hand signals to communicate. Celine stayed crouched, counting their positions, watching the way they moved. It wasn't reckless, it wasn't sloppy. They'd done this before, but they hadn't done it against her. She waited until the first of them reached the wire, a gloved hand reaching out to test the line. Then she clicked the trigger on the nearest sensor manually. A soft hum, a flash. The figure flinched, pulling back, and Celine's voice broke the night. "You're in the wrong field." The men froze. One stood fast, weapon drawn. Another turned, scanning for the source of the voice. But Celine was already moving, flanking hard left, rifle up, sight steady. First shot clean, suppressed. Whisper quiet. The man near the fence dropped hard. The second raised his rifle, but Jordan's shot cracked from the tower, cutting him down before he could aim. Panic broke their line. The two remaining scrambled back toward the trees, shouting commands. But it was too late. Malik shifted position like they'd practiced, sliding along the sandbags, lining up his shot. He waited for the lead figure to break from the brush. One breath. One squeeze. The runner staggered, shot to the leg, collapsing into the grass with a grunt of pain. The last one bolted for the tree line, but Celine was faster. She moved through the field like shadow, cutting the gap between them, pistol raised. She didn't fire to kill. Not yet. One round into the dirt near his feet. The message was clear. The man dropped his weapon, hands high. "Down!" Celine ordered. "Face on the ground!" The man obeyed. Fast, breath sharp, eyes wide beneath a black mask. By the time Jordan and Clarence reached her position, the skirmish was over. 3 bodies still, one alive, wrists tied tight with the plastic cuffs Celine kept clipped to her vest. Ruth arrived last, checking the wounded, her movements clinical. Celine crouched beside the captured man, pulling the mask from his face. Early 30s, white, eyes darting between them, calculating. "Name!" Celine demanded. He said nothing. She didn't ask twice. Just pressed the muzzle of her pistol against the dirt near his ear. "Name!" "Rick," he spat. "Rick Dawson." Jordan crouched beside her, scanning the man's gear. "No local tags, no ID. Who sent you?" Celine asked. Rick clamped his jaw tight. Jordan leaned close. "We can make you talk, son, or we can leave you out here bleeding for the coyotes." Rick's lips curled into a faint, nervous smile. "You think I'm scared of you?" Selena's eyes stayed flat, cold. "No," she answered. "I think you should be." They dragged the bodies into the barn, laid the wounded man near the back wall. Ruth worked quick, stripping gear, checking for intel, patching the leg wound just enough to keep him breathing. Jordan paced near the doorway, running a hand over his beard. "This wasn't a scare tactic," he said. "They came to take." Celine nodded. "And they'll send more." Malik leaned against the wall, rifle still in his hands, breath finally slowing. "Did we win?" he asked. Celine turned to him. "No," she said. "We survived." Chapter 9. The Interrogation. Rick Dawson didn't sleep that night. Not that they gave him the chance. The cuffs bit into his wrists where Malik had tied them tight, arms looped through the rafters of the barn, his knees sagging beneath his own weight. Blood still oozed slow from the clean bandage Ruth Daniels had wrapped around his leg. Mercy enough to keep him breathing, but not enough to make him comfortable. Celine Carter sat across from him on an overturned feed crate, elbows on her knees, eyes locked steady on his face. She didn't speak right away. Didn't need to. The silence worked like a crowbar, prying at the corners of Rick's nerves. His jaw clenched tight, eyes flicking between Celine and the others in the barn. Malik leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, rifle slung over his shoulder. Jordan Tate stood by the door, radio clipped to his vest, listening. The rest of the crew kept their distance but didn't leave. Their presence filled the space like pressure. Celine waited until Rick's breathing shifted, fast, uneven, before she finally spoke. "You've got one chance to make this easier." Rick gave a breathless little laugh, shaking his head. "You're not gonna kill me." Celine's gaze didn't move. "No," she answered, "but I'll let you wish I had." She stood, slow and steady, crossing the dirt floor until she stood inches from him. Her hand came up, not fast, not violent, just resting the tip of her finger against his shoulder, tapping twice. "You're not the first man to come at me with a weapon. You won't be the last." But you might be the dumbest if you think I won't find out what I need. Jordan shifted his weight near the door. We know you're not working alone. Selene's eyes narrowed. What we don't know is how far up the chain you sit. Rick's grin faltered just a little. Who's giving the orders? Selene asked. Rick spat into the dirt near her boot. You know, lady, he said, eyes darting toward the door. I've dealt with people like you before. Think you're hard. Think you're in control. But I know how this works. Sooner or later, someone comes riding in here with badges, and you're the one sitting in my seat. Selene leaned in closer, voice dropping to a whisper. Then I'd better make this quick. She turned on her heel and walked back to the crate, sitting down again, calm as a surgeon. See, she continued, I'm not trying to scare you. Men like you don't scare easy. You sign up for the fight. You think that makes you dangerous. Her gaze hardened. But I've seen dangerous. I've been dangerous. You're just hired muscle. Rick's mouth twitched. Body armor don't make you bulletproof, Jordan added from the door. Neither does pride, Selene finished. Ruth moved past quietly, dropping a canteen of water near Rick's feet. She didn't offer it, just let it sit there, untouched. Rick's eyes stayed fixed on Selene. You won't shoot me. Selene smiled faintly. No, she said again, but I'm not here alone. Malik stepped forward now, slow, deliberate, not angry, focused. You were crawling toward my home, Malik said, voice low, steady. Toward my mother. Rick swallowed hard. Malik's eyes didn't blink. I could have killed you clean out there, Malik continued. But I wanted to know why you thought you could walk onto my land like you owned it. He crouched in front of Rick, head tilted. Who sent you? Rick tried to hold the stare, but his eyes dropped first. The room stayed quiet long enough for the weight to settle. Then Selene rose again. She didn't shout, didn't threaten. She just walked slow toward the rope that still hung from the rafter, the same one they had found swinging in the barn days before. She ran her hand along the rough fiber, then let the rope sway between her fingers as she turned back to Rick. You know what that is, right? Rick said nothing. Selene took 2 steps closer, her shadow stretching long across the dirt. I know the men who tied this, she said. I know they're kind, and I know they wouldn't be the ones paying your crew. They don't have that kind of money. Hate like theirs only buys gasoline and matches. She let the rope swing once. You're working for somebody bigger, somebody who wants this land. She let the word hang there. Forward futures. Rick's jaw clenched. His shoulders shifted. His body gave him away before his mouth did. Selene smiled, thin and sharp. There it is. Jordan pushed off the doorframe, walking slow toward them. Travis Cole, he said, watching Rick's face. You run with his crew? Rick's lips parted, just enough. Malik stood. Or are you just the decoy, the first wave to soften the line before the real strike? Rick's face twitched. Who gave the order to hit the Turners? Selene asked. Silence. Who's next on the list? Rick's breathing sped up. Sweat beaded along his brow. Selene nodded toward Ruth. Cut him loose. Ruth raised an eyebrow but moved to the cuffs, slicing the plastic restraint. Rick's arms dropped limp to his sides. Selene stepped back, gave him space. You're free to walk out of here, she said. Rick stared at her, confused. But if I see you again, if you so much as put a boot on my land, you won't crawl back the next time. Rick's lips twisted, still trying to find some edge to hold on to. Selene nodded toward the door. Go. Jordan pulled the door wide, letting the cool night air rush in. Rick stood slowly, favoring his injured leg. His eyes bounced between them all, Selene, Malik, Jordan, Ruth, weighing his odds. And then he spit into the dirt one last time and limped out into the night. Ruth turned toward Selene, frowning. You're letting him go? He's going to run straight back to whoever's paying him, Selene replied. And when he does, they'll know. Know what? Malik asked. Celine's eyes stayed locked on the door, where Rick had vanished into the dark. That we're ready. End of chapter 9. If you're ready, I can jump into chapter 10, the chain of command. Mau lanjut sekarang? Anda bilang bab 10 ChatGPT bilang absolutely. Here's chapter 10, the chain of command, keeping the flow, pacing, and intensity consistent with the previous chapters. Chapter 10, the chain of command. Rick Dawson didn't make it 5 miles before the news traveled back. Not by radio, not by phone. By the way silence shifted in a place like Ridge Hollow. The morning after they let him walk, 2 unfamiliar trucks were spotted idling near the old freight station. Blackout windows, unmarked plates. Men leaning against the tailgates with that same posture Celine Carter knew too well. The kind of ease that comes from carrying a weapon under your coat. They weren't locals, and they weren't hiding. The message was clear. We're still here. But the problem was, so was she. Celine gathered the crew back at the barn before noon. The map was pinned flat against the table again, weighted at the corners by 4 empty casings and a rusted wrench. Malik stood near the loft ladder, arms crossed, watching. Jordan sat on the edge of the feed bin, radio clipped to his vest, scanning frequencies. Ruth, always steady, stood by the window, eyes on the horizon. They're not backing off, Celine said. They're escalating. Jordan grunted. Makes sense. Their first move failed. Now they're going to try to scare us into folding before they bleed more resources? Celine tapped the map, her finger landing on the freight station. Those trucks parked here this morning. Same timing as Dawson limping his way back out of Ridge Hollow. She leaned closer. They're waiting for someone. Who? Malik asked. Celine's eyes didn't move from the map. Whoever's calling the shots. The waiting didn't last long. By sundown, Sheriff Doyle Grant's cruiser was spotted rolling slow down the station road. The same sheriff who hadn't lifted a finger after Reggie Turner burned. The same sheriff who hadn't answered Celine's calls. He didn't park near the freight house, didn't make a show of his presence, but the timing was too clean to ignore. Celine watched from the grain tower as the sheriff's taillights faded into the dark. Jordan's voice came low over the comms. You still think he's just incompetent? No, Celine answered. I think he's on the payroll. That night, Celine didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, papers spread wide beneath the yellow light of the hanging lamp. Property records, sales contracts, shell company registrations, all roads led back to Forward Futures. But not just Forward Futures. Buried in the filings, tucked deep inside subsidiary listings, was a signature. Travis Cole, former paramilitary, known contractor. The name whispered in more than one burned-out county between here and Texas. But it wasn't Cole's name that made Celine's stomach turn. It was the one listed beneath him, on the board of oversight for Forward Future's redevelopment initiative. Dr. Vivian Hale. Celine's eyes narrowed as she read the title again. Director of Strategic Operations. Agricultural Equity Program. It sounded harmless, almost benevolent. But Celine had spent enough time around military contractors and reconstruction ops to know what that kind of language really meant. She closed the file slowly, sat back in the chair. This isn't just land grabbing, she whispered. Malik stood in the doorway, watching her. What is it then? Celine's voice stayed flat. This is coordinated displacement. The next morning, Celine made calls. Not to the sheriff, not to the state. She reached out to old names, the kind not listed in local directories, contacts from her time overseas, former analysts, a few retired intelligence officers still sharp enough to read between lines. It took 3 hours before one of them called back. The voice on the other end was rough, middle-aged, clipped. You're asking about Hale? Yes. You sitting down? Celine's jaw tightened. I'm listening. Doctor. Vivian Hale doesn't just work land deals. She's on 3 separate contractor boards tied to defense logistics. One of them's been flagged twice in overseas audits for resource funneling. What kind of resource? The voice hesitated. Movement of people, forced relocations, asset clearance. Celine felt the weight of the words drop into her chest like lead. The man continued. Every time there's a war zone cleanup or a redevelopment deal where the locals won't sell, Hale's name shows up in the paperwork. Quiet, legal, sanitized. And forward futures? A shell, the voice confirmed. Money comes from a mix of hedge funds and private contractors, but the strategy? That's Hale's. Celine's grip tightened on the phone. You have names? The voice paused again. I have files. I need them. I'll send what I can. Click. The line went dead. By sundown, a flash drive arrived by courier. No return address. Dropped quiet at the back door of the church where Jordan was posted. Celine plugged it into the battered laptop at the barn. The folder tree bloomed on the screen. Land acquisitions. Ridge Hollow region. Operational oversight, Sable Project, Phase 2 targets. She clicked through. Deeds, signatures, coordinates, red marks on maps, but it was the Phase 2 folder that made her stop. There, listed plain as day, Celine Carter, Malik, Carter, Jordan Tate, Ruth Daniels targeted for neutralization. The note beneath their names was clinical. Resistance leadership identified. Removal advised prior to Phase 3. Celine sat back in the chair, staring at the screen. It wasn't just about the land anymore. They weren't trying to force a sale. They were planning to erase every person standing in their way.